We tried in the delivery phase to be transparent. We promised that we would, so we kept the public informed every day about how we were doing. If we had problems, we told them. If we had challenges, we told them. If we had issues, financial or otherwise, we told them, so that as we were moving towards the conclusion of the games, that we would have public support. During the delivery phase, we launched a project that many of you may have heard of called Own the Podium. Own the Podium was a project, a sporting project, that was started to try to give the Canadian Olympic team a fighting chance to be amongst the top nations in 2010. We invested $110 million in that program, and we moved from a middle-of-the-pack country in winter sports to the top 3, and Canada won the most gold medals of any country at a Winter Olympic Games ever, and still has that record with 14 gold medals. So this was really important because the Olympic Games were being staged in Vancouver. Vancouver is 6 time zones from Newfoundland. So it was important for us to give every person, wherever they lived in the country, a reason to turn on their television and be excited about what was happening in their country. And we knew they wouldn't care too much about, you know, how we were running the games, whether the transportation worked or whether the venues were built on time or not. What they would care about is seeing Canadian athletes perform and hearing the Canadian national anthem played again and again and again at the games. And it was a way to bring every person and engage every person in the success of the Olympics. And this worked beautifully. The games were delivered in both official languages of Canada, in English and French, and in order to make the people of the world feel welcome, we tried to recruit volunteers and staff who spoke above 30 languages so that people would feel at home and welcome in an area of the world that is very multicultural and bilingual already. There was a national euphoria in Canada around the delivery of the games, and this is because every Canadian felt it was theirs. It was their project. They felt a sense of ownership. They felt this need to contribute to the staging of the Olympic Games. So when we had big challenges, and we did, on the opening day of the Games, you will remember that an athlete lost his life in Vancouver. It was an incredibly difficult, challenging start, and it was the Canadian public that rallied the organizing committee to overcome this horrible start and keep on going, because they felt this sense of connection to help the Games be a great success. You will remember in the build-up to the Olympic Winter Games that we had no snow in Vancouver. It's a bit of a problem when you have no snow. You can't ski if you don't have snow. So the nearest snow we could find to Vancouver was 100 miles away. So we had to mobilize an enterprise to go 100 miles away and start delivering snow for 6 weeks, 24 hours a day, to cover the mountain of Cyprus in Vancouver, cheered on by the public. The country felt like this was their project. So when the big challenges came, everybody felt it was theirs. This was what I like to think of, this was an active legacy. Everybody felt that they were involved. We didn't just say, this will be good for you. We actually engaged every person in the whole spiritual experience of staging the Games. We sold out the Games. There was a person in every seat. By the time the Games arrived, people felt this was something that they wanted to be involved in. They came from all over. It was the thing to have a ticket, to not just come and watch a sporting event, or to see a bobsledder or a hockey player or a skater, but to be able to say that you attended the Olympic Games in your own country. We had achieved that level of acceptance and buy-in with the public. 99% of Canadians watched the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games on television. It's an unprecedented number, which really related to the fact that we had made this all about the public in the first place. We had these massive celebration zones in Vancouver. We had celebration zones everywhere because we realized that very few people really ever get to actually see an event live. But we wanted everyone to have an Olympic and Paralympic experience. So we opened up these zones that were spectacularly successful. And people who will remember Vancouver, who attended Vancouver, will remember the remarkable numbers of people who took to the streets to celebrate with the rest of the world about what was going on in their own country. So That was the delivery phase. And we tried very much to live up to the promises that we had made. And so that at the time that the world arrived in Vancouver, there would be a feeling that the project deserved to succeed. So I'd just like to touch on some of the projects that took place that live on today as a shining example of the power of the Olympics. We have a new train line from the airport into downtown Vancouver. It was not an Olympic project, nor was it used for Olympic transport, but it was viewed by our government to be a necessary part of making the city world-class. It achieved its most lofty ambitions for use within 1 month. The train is enormously successful, very inexpensive, and a great way to get into downtown Vancouver very quickly today. The convention center in Vancouver, which became the home of television and the media, has been voted the best convention center in the world, and our convention business, the last 3 or 4 years have, one year after the other, been the best years we have ever had in Canada, all attributed to the Olympic Games. We made improvements at the airport for the Olympic Games because we realized that if you come to an Olympic city and you have a bad airport experience, it tends to not make you feel that good about the city that you're in. And today, all of those improvements live on in the way the airport at Vancouver operates. It's been voted the best airport in North America for 8 straight years. It's very customer friendly. And we try to create an atmosphere in the airport that when you came off an airplane into the city, you felt that there was a genuine welcome. People were happy to see you. And that continues to this day. As I said, the villages are a shining example of 2 housing developments that were badly needed, that were constructed in the most difficult of times, but today are beautiful parts of both Whistler and Vancouver. And here's the interesting thing about what the Olympic Games caused. Every business, every family, every entity, every level of government, every local government, provincial government, national government, had a 2010 plan. Everyone saw and accepted the invitation they had to be part of this project, to pitch in, to have something that was aimed and focused at the Olympic Games. And so this was another part of, and this has lived on in the way people conduct themselves in Vancouver today. So other areas that we don't tend to talk about in respect to legacy would be policing and security. We were worried in the build-up to the Games that policing and security could dampen the spirit around the Olympics. So we asked our police agencies and our security machinery to employ a different strategy, to employ the strategy of securing the Games, but to do it with a smile on your face, to make people feel good, to contribute to the atmosphere that existed around the venues, to make people feel that the police were no more than great volunteers helping you to really enjoy and feel good about the experience you had inside a venue. And the respect people have for the police and the way they delivered those services lives on today. The convention center, as I said, to walk through the convention center and see the energy and how popular and how busy it is really quite something to behold. As I said, airport operations are spectacularly efficient. I think you'll find if you ever come through Vancouver International Airport, it is quite the experience to behold. Tourism. Organizing committees and cities and countries bidding for the Olympics always talk about tourism, the effect that tourism, the effect the Games will have on tourism. I can say, honestly, standing here today, that we have never had a better period in our history than we have now. The numbers have been growing rapidly. All of this is attributed to the Olympic Games, that the effect that the Olympic Games had on people's view of Canada and of Vancouver, and every year they come in bigger and bigger numbers. And it has created a huge economic lift for the city and put a smile on the face of the city that perhaps we didn't have before the Games. So when we look back, and if someone said to me, what are the legacies you feel most proud of? Well, here they are. I feel that the way we navigated the global financial meltdown was heroic. What we did was not just, we did what other people did, But there is a tendency sometimes when you have financial issues to look around for someone else to solve your problems. It was on us to solve that problem, and we solved it in the most difficult of times. So when the games were delivered against all of that adversity, the admiration of the public was significantly greater than it otherwise might have been. Our construction program that we promised to deliver on time and on budget was almost impossible to do. But we made a promise and we kept it. And so we look back and we point to it as an example of what you can do even in tough times. The operational results we achieved against the same backdrop. We finished up in the black and left a small financial legacy for sport post-games is also a matter of great pride and extremely important to Canadians who expect you to keep your promises. Overcoming adversity. The games are enormously challenging and complicated. You face adversity every day, but with the gaze of the media and public watching everything you're doing, to be able to overcome adversity against all is hugely important and a great legacy. I like to think of it as a legacy of your behavior. People today would say, you know, if they could do it in 2010, we can do it now. That it sets the example of what's possible even against the most difficult of headwinds. We achieved unprecedented cooperation by everybody. There were no outsiders. Everyone was in. Everyone cooperated. Everyone in the country came to see that it was their duty to contribute to this global opportunity that we had to showcase what Canada was to the whole world. We ran the longest torch relay in history, which made us feel good, not because of its length, but because of the fact that we said we would take it to every home in Canada and kept that promise. The Olympic Oval, we believe, is one of the finest buildings of its kind in the world. And yes, we had a nice speed skating event in the Oval, but today this is a profit center for sport. If you go into the Oval, it speaks volumes about how well planned this was. It creates terrific revenues for the community. All kinds of sports are staged in the Oval. And there is no sign today in that building of speed skating. Canada's speed skating headquarters are in Calgary. But there is a myriad of other sports in the building because the city of Richmond decided that the Oval needed to be built for tomorrow, not for today, when there was no demand for speed skating in the city of Richmond. The Hillcrest Centre in the middle of Vancouver is a massive neighborhood facility that used to be the Olympic curling venue for the Olympic Games. And today, this is where young people that live in the center of Vancouver grow up and go to school. It's making an enormous contribution to public life in Vancouver today. All of the facilities in Whistler have enhanced the city of Whistler has been voted the best ski resort in the world a number of times, and with the Nordic Centre and all of these other facilities that were built, the venue just has, its stature as a destination has grown, and we're obviously very proud of that. One of the interesting things for us was every Olympic Games is a story. It begins somewhere and it ends somewhere, and many things happen along the way. Post the Vancouver Games, and in the mid part of 2010, Future Brand, which is an international agency that scores national brands, voted Canada as the #1 international brand in the world because of the Olympics. Now, I don't think this had anything to do with how we organized the Games, but it had everything to do with how the public of Canada came together. They became partners in welcoming the world and making sure that when big challenges came, we overcame them. They sent a message to the world about what it meant to be Canadian. They showed the world the difference between what it is to be Canadian and someone else, and it caught the attention of the whole planet. I often say that the Olympic Games are an opportunity for you to have a conversation with the rest of the world on your own terms. And to me, this award validated that view. So today, we are enormously proud looking back at how far we have come in the world of sport in Canada. Sport matters to Canadians because of the fact that we have succeeded through what we did for Vancouver 2010, and our athletes have become more equipped to compete on the international stage, and our programs have continued to grow. Canadians now see the power of sport. Children are attracted to sport in greater numbers, and our performance as a nation has grown. Today, Canada is a top 3 nation in winter sport and a top 10 nation in summer sport, largely connected to this idea of putting sport at the center of what matters to the country. So in Canada, sport really matters. One of the interesting things about Vancouver that caught most people by surprise was this. And this to me is a legacy of a project that has a certain kind of story to it, was the way Canadians came outside. People went out their front doors into the streets to celebrate this thing that was going on in their country, not just in Vancouver, but in Calgary and Montreal and Toronto and in small towns and villages across the country. And when the games ended, one of the comments that the president of the IOC made in his final press conference in Vancouver was that the Olympic Games can never go back from this. And I think what he was saying is the Olympic Games belong to everyone, not the few, everybody. And so this legacy promise that we made was about making sure it does something for everyone, that every family feels this sense of ownership. I never felt like the organizing committee of the Olympic Games of 2010 was this elite little, I felt we were all doing it together. Everyone had a role to play. So today, we have no complaints about being financially responsible. We have no complaints about the venues that we built. We have no complaints about the lack of tourism. We have no complaints about being financially irresponsible. We have no complaints about a lack of transparency. We have no complaints about not involving Aboriginal Canada in the staging of the Games. We have no complaints about the promises we made, because the public feels that we did what we said we set out to do. If you can achieve that much, you're on your way to having a spectacular legacy that lives on for a very, very long time. In my opinion, when we talk about legacy and we use the words social, economical, and environmental, the word we need to add to the list is behavioral. It's the way you go about this, the way you bring people together, the way people see you, the humility of how you do things. The legacy exists in everything we do. It's not a traditional thing, it's in all things. How you go about the work, how you engage people, keeping your promises, every single thing matters and becomes part of the legacy. I'm very proud today to say that I think that Vancouver was a good story. It was good for our country. 20 years from now, we will see how far this legacy has continued. If someone said to me, you know, what would you have hoped was the greatest of all legacies coming out of this? I would hope that 20 years from now, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, our children in Canada would look back and say that what they did in Vancouver in 2010 mattered, and that what was left for them was impressive, and that they were given a better chance at life because of the staging of the Games, that they can look back with great pride and admiration for the opportunity that they would be given. And I think it's a great measure of a society if we can leave things better for the one that follows us. Thank you. I look forward to your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Furlong, for your wonderful presentation, reminding us about the importance of keeping promises made and of getting everyone involved and engaged in the Games. Some wonderful messages there. We very much look forward now to our next presentation, which will be delivered by Mr. Ben Fletcher, Director of Strategy, Marketing and Communication of the London Legacy Development Corporation. He is here to share his experience with the London 2012 Games. Please give Mr. Fletcher a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me today. It is a real pleasure to be here. This is my first visit to South Korea. It's a very short visit, but it's a particularly enjoyable one, and it's a great feeling to be here, part of this event and listening to such an inspirational set of speakers. For anyone like me who worked on a Games for a very long period of time, you actually miss it a little bit when it's done. In fact, you miss it quite a lot. We often meet in special support centres, which in London are called, it's a technical term, pubs. And we get together and we remind ourselves of how great it was. And at events like this, build on those kind of support centres. So it's the occasion when I can wear my 2012 cufflinks and my 2012 pin badge and not feel too embarrassed to be still wallowing in the past. What I wanted to talk to you about today was, I think, a very neat follow-on from the presentation that you've just had from John. John gave you, I think, a compelling and brilliant story, and I feel rather awkward following such an impassioned presentation about the kind of scale of putting on the Games and the scale of delivering the Games and the scale of some very powerful legacies. What I'm going to try and do is to tell you a little bit maybe about a micro to follow on from that macro story about something very specific we've done in London around Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and the project, which is one of many legacy projects in London that follow on from the 2012 Games, but the biggest one, we think the most important one, but very much a very specific project which will hopefully give you an idea of how we did it, and most importantly, what's still yet to come, because there are many, many years, as I think has been a central theme from all of today's presentations, that you can't deliver legacy in 6 weeks or 6 months. Legacies take generations to evolve, and we still feel that our best years are ahead of us. I'm conscious also that I'm the last speaker before the coffee break, so what I'm going to do at the beginning, rather than at the end, is sum up my presentation before you've heard it. This is a slightly unusual approach, I know, but I hope you may find it useful, and it may make some of what comes afterwards a little bit more relevant and put it in some context. The most important thing that we did in the preparation phase, and I didn't work on legacy then, I had a different role before the Games, but we put legacy first. Very, very similar to what John told you about Vancouver. Legacy, as I'll explain in a second, was the reason why we bid for the London Olympics in the first place. And in the 4 or 5 years that I worked on the Games beforehand, there was not a single meeting that didn't discuss the legacy implications of what we were doing. Absolutely everything was driven by legacy all the way through, from the beginning through to the very end. We set up my organisation several years before the 2012 Games so that the legacy ability, the legacy delivery could exist to take on responsibilities before the Games to make sure they were taken through. There was a very clear set of objectives. We now summarise those financially. They were summarised in slightly more significant and lofty ways before, but essentially for the park, the legacy was to build 25,000 homes for 55,000 Londoners, homes in a city like Seoul where living is at a premium, it's expensive, it's difficult to obtain. Building homes for 55,000 people is a massive issue for London. And actually making that promise and delivering on that promise was a key pledge. To provide workspace and employment opportunities for 40,000 people on the park was another part of that very, very clear commitment. And to turn the park into a major visitor destination that was going to attract 125, 130 million visitors in its first few years of operation was another really big pledge. And then what we've changed and what we've added to that list is we're going to build a culture and education district which is going to attract hundreds of millions of visitors, some of the biggest names in global culture and education, and help deliver an economic benefit measured in billions of pounds into London was another key issue. Ownership is a really key issue. If you're studying this, I talked about the organisation being created before the Games. Everyone here, I think, has talked about how legacy has permeated its way through the delivery phase, the preparation phase, and the subsequent phase. We created an organisation to take that ownership so that it was responsible, it could make sure that promises were kept. And another key theme is if you make a promise, you have to keep it. It was absolutely important that it was visible. In Britain, we have an extremely diverse and significant media that are intrusive, and that's very important to us. But as well as that kind of pull to release information, we've been very transparent. That importance of transparency is absolutely key. And we live by the kind of cliche that what gets measured gets done. And what we say we're going to do, we report on. We make targets, we tell people how we're performing on them. We did that before the Games, we did that during the Games, we now do it in legacy mode after the Games. And what I hope you'll also find from everyone's presentation today is that the key element in all of this is passion. Everyone who worked on the Games wanted to work on the Games. They made career choices, they made life choices. Their families had to live with the fact that they didn't see a significant part of the family for weeks and weeks on end, months on end, sometimes years on end. You need that passion to deliver a Games, and you need that passion to deliver legacy. And actually that's been a really key thing for us. The people we recruit, they either worked on 2012 and they have a burning desire to see those promises through, or they sat at home and a bit like the people of Canada, or a bit like the people of Korea during the World Cup and the Olympics in '88, they felt a burning pride at what was being achieved. And when Legacy in London started, people who'd sat at home and felt inspired by that wanted to come and work on it. Everyone talks quite rightly about the inspiration that the Olympics gives you if you want to go off and be a sports person. It can also work in a myriad different number of other ways. And we benefit on the Legacy programme in London by the people who've been motivated and excited by seeing what happened was such a significant event in the UK, and now they want to be part of what's happening afterwards. And those are the really key things that I think deliver a successful Legacy programme. I'm now going to take you through some slides, a couple of videos as well, hopefully not too long and won't keep you from coffee. But I think, in essence, the nutshell of what we are achieving hopefully was just summarised then and gives you a sense of what we are trying to do in London. I'm very happy afterwards to take questions. I'm also conscious that I will have to move through some of these slides reasonably swiftly, but they are available to you, particularly those of you who are studying this issue, and we're very happy to pick questions up afterwards. So, why did we do London? I said a second ago, legacy was the reason why we bid for this in the first place. That map shows you London. It's a big global city, city that some of you will be very familiar with. The Games bid was about regenerating a part of London that was not just deprived by the standards of London, which is a big city, an economic powerhouse in the country. It was actually saying that there are bits of London that haven't benefited from the success of the city and the growth and the wealth of the country. And bits of East London that cluster around what is now the Olympic Park were not just some of the most economic and socially deprived areas of London, they were some of the most deprived areas of the entire country, and indeed, on many measures, some of the most deprived parts of Europe. So this Games bid was about taking a piece of land which was toxic, it was heavily polluted, having been previously a home to great industry, particularly petrochemicals and industrial dyes, and the soil was so toxic that actually people for many years, as in the initial delivery phase, had to work in hazardous chemical protection suits while we cleared it and detoxified the land. And above the land, we were also taking in most of the power supply to central London, so it was covered with electricity pylons above, which meant you couldn't build up, and the land was polluted, which meant you couldn't build down. So you had this enormous piece of land that was beyond use. No private sector developer would invest in it because it was impossible to get a return on that investment, and you had this enormous chunk of real estate, very central in London, in the middle of enormous areas of deprivation, that wasn't doing anything, it was economically inactive. And the great vision was already there, which was to turn that land into something that would stimulate growth, create new houses, bring new prosperity. But the Olympics was the key that turned the lock to open that up, because it provided the investment in that bit of London that would actually make that real, overcome those problems, hundreds of millions of pounds to take the pollution out of the soil, hundreds of millions of pounds to take these absolutely critical overhead electricity pylons out and put them in tunnels underground and bring this piece of land back to life. And to give you a sense of what it looked like before the Games, this was around the time of the bid. You get in the background the tower blocks of Canary Wharf, London's new financial heart, absolutely wonderful area, full of new offices, many, many thousands of jobs, delivering enormous economic powerhouse just a few miles away. And all the Games people worked in Canary Wharf in one of those tower blocks, and you looked at this site, and it was home to scrap metal yards. It was home to large collections of fridge freezers full of CFC gases that could no longer be used in people's homes. It was amazingly, in the middle of this city. Not all of it, some of it was very important industrial use, but very large parts of it were an industrial wasteland. And it was that was the motivator for moving us forward. Strategically, the location of the park was also very important for economists, for people who look at the way in which cities develop, and it was in the kind of corridor that separated central London from East London. It's where the railway networks all came together. It's where a lot of industrial land met office space. It's where housing met where people worked. And there is a corridor, that red line through London, and the Olympic Park was at the heart of it. It was where all of the economic potential was, and if we got that site right, it unlocked an enormous piece of land. In fact, we now know that actually we were under-ambitious in our scale, that it's had a potential actually going well beyond London and outside London. But this was a key strategic point in the way in which the city grew. So where we got to, I think I may have just clicked through to, doesn't matter, it was boring anyway. Where we got to here in 2007 was this big site, and you can see in the photograph that you have these brownfield sites surrounded by high-density housing. This is an area of London that was very central, but it was a very significant piece of land. And where we got to a couple of years after the bid was that we had started to clear the land, we had knocked down what was there, we'd cleared away all of the waste, and we now had this great platform from which to build. And between 2007 and 2012, that's what we did with the site. We built the sporting venues that were going to be permanent, that were going to stay there forever: the stadium, the aquatic centre, the velodrome, the copper box. We kept a warm-up track so that we could keep this for future events. That, although we moved the warm-up track slightly closer to the stadium, that's enabled us this year to host the World Athletics Championships. We built the Athletes Village, which was the first part of our housing development, already home to over 5,000 people. 50% of the people that live in the Athletes Village now live in genuinely affordable housing. A significant amount of the people that live there are in social housing, so they pay a very, very small rent. They came from very long local authority waiting lists to live in premium housing. There's not a social housing block. People live in mixed blocks of private tenants, affordable rents, and social rents. But what's very important in this photograph, because it's not how it quite looks today, is you had the mixture of permanent venues and temporary venues. So next to the aquatic centre, just in the middle right of the picture, we have a water polo venue. And exactly the same way that we were ruthless with many things, we kept the venues that we knew would sustain, and like Vancouver, decided that we wouldn't keep the ones where there was no demand. So we didn't keep the water polo venue, we didn't keep the basketball arena, we made the hockey venue much, much smaller and moved it across the park. But in terms of where we got to before the Games, we moved from this incredibly dense, toxic, polluted site that was beyond use in a very, very short period of time, and built this enormous venue with all of these different arenas within it, ready for Games time. And then that was great. We had a Games. It was absolutely fantastic. But this was the beginning of the legacy programme for London. It was the end of a fantastic adventure. It was the end of a brilliant time for the UK, and hopefully a Games that are still remembered positively around the world. But actually, almost the minute that the Paralympics ended, we started an incredibly complex transformation program. And what we were doing is bringing the park from its Games time use and the picture that you just saw into its post-Games use, a kind of state that we hoped would sustain for probably about 100 years. Another large pot of money, another funding pot on top of the £9.2 billion that was spent on the Games itself, another funding pot of close to 300 million on making those changes. We had to remove some venues, we had to fundamentally restructure some venues, and we had to do it all in a very short period of time, because one of the challenges of a successful Games is that everyone then expects legacy to almost happen overnight. So everyone wanted to get into the park, everyone wanted to be part of this great success story, and we had to go away, and the first piece of news we had to give them was to disappoint them and tell them it wasn't going to reopen for another year. So an incredibly intense program, a very busy program, something that we worked on very hard to move us forward from a games time configuration to a legacy configuration. But it was absolutely key to what we then had to do next, because if we didn't get that right, if we didn't make those changes, we would have lost momentum, we would have lost political interest, we would have lost the support of Londoners for actually achieving that project. So we moved very, very hard, and we actually changed the program so that we could open some bits of the park early. Now, I am going to just flick through this video, because much as it's very interesting, we can put it on the website afterwards and people can have a look at it. If there's anyone in IT that could just skip through that, that is brilliant. Thank you. Oh, almost. Yeah, perfect. So, what was important, I think, afterwards was that we had this platform to take forward the regeneration, and I summarized it before. It was thousands and thousands of homes for tens of thousands of people. It was bringing workspace, new offices, small business space for startups, engineering space for specialist firms, high-tech space for people that needed it. And we needed a series of platforms to do this. The first one was the transport links. There was this huge investment in improving transport for the Games, a huge degree of quite rightly concern that London, which is often a city where people get stuck in long traffic jams, it couldn't sustain the Games. In order to deliver the Games, there was an enormous investment in transport, but part of that long-term investment, part of the strategic case for that investment, was that actually, if you got it right, you would help to open up this bit of London so that people would come and work there, people would come and visit. So we now have this fantastically well-connected part of the capital. We have moved, as I said earlier, from this deprived area. Stratford Station, which is at the heart of the Olympic Park, has now gone from being about the 50th busiest station in London to being about the 6th busiest station in London. And it is anticipated that within the next 5 years, it will become the 3rd or 4th busiest station in London. And in terms of the number of lines that serve that station, it's regarded as being possibly the best connected station anywhere in Europe. So that investment gives you the platform to build growth and to deliver major regeneration. As well as the businesses that attracts, it also helps attract visitors, and this becomes a resource. The Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park doesn't just become a hub for regeneration, it becomes a facility for tourists and a facility for local people. Since the park reopened partially in 2013, fully in 2014, we've attracted almost 20 million visitors. That's an enormous number of people. The individual venues have been hugely successful in their own right in terms of attracting people. The park itself attracts people, and we expect, as I said earlier, to grow from about 18 to 20 million to over 125 million in the years ahead. That gives you a sense of kind of where we got to straight after the Games. But as I said earlier, a huge amount yet to do, and I just want to take you fairly briefly through that. A lot of these things I said earlier, I will move through quite quickly, but they are available to you afterwards. So again, if we could just click through the video, but again, we'll make that available to you later on. London Stadium, a challenging venue, very difficult. This is one of those areas where actually the pre-Games plan was to have a venue for the Games that was largely temporary, leaving a 20,000 capacity stadium afterwards. That was one of the few things that we changed. We've kept the stadium at pretty much its Games time capacity. We've introduced some retractable seating so it can host Premier League football in the winter and athletics in the summer, and it very gloriously held the World Athletics and World Paralympics Championships this summer. That's a real success for us, and it's not just a success in and of itself. Absolutely key, and similar to the story about Vancouver, having a successful stadium is a huge part of the wider regeneration program. So even though the stadium has cost a lot of money, even though there are issues and challenges to make that right, the fact that it's busy, the fact that it's successful, the fact that every second Saturday for 2/3 of the year, 55,000 people come and watch Premier League football, the fact that this summer every single session of the World Athletics Championships pretty much sold out, record attendances, vastly brilliant attendances at the World Paralympics Championships. I think their best attendances by some enormous degree against any other previous World Para-Athletics Championships. That is great on its own, but that creates a profile, a heartbeat, a really visible sense of that success of the area that stimulates people wanting to come and bring their businesses there, stimulates people who might want to come and visit there on other days. It has a really profound effect. And the mirror opposite is that if that stadium isn't busy, if you let it sit empty and if it sits and rusts, even if it doesn't cost you any money, it has the opposite effect. It detracts people, it makes your area look like a failure, it makes your area look like it's not successful. So for us, the stadium is important in its own right, but it's also totemic to the wider regeneration. We have a number of other venues on the park. We have the Aquatic Centre, we have the Copper Box, which is the indoor gym, hosts things like basketball and other indoor sports, and the Velodrome. They're all hugely successful. They've all hosted major global sporting events in their own right. They all attract huge numbers of people. And there is that ongoing sense of busyness, the numbers of people that come in, that keeps making the area feel vibrant, and it makes it feel like a new part of London and a new part of our capital city in the UK. We've also invested in different things. So the previous mayor of London decided to build the Orbit. It was a fantastic visible sign of the 2012 Games. Lots of TV coverage of this remarkable red piece of sculpture, the biggest piece of public art in the UK. We decided to move on from it just being a piece of art, and we, with another artist, Carsten Holler, put a slide on it. It's now become one of London's most successful visitor attractions. It's a white knuckle ride. It's a bit like getting a slide from the top of Big Ben down to the ground, but it shows you the different things that you have to do to keep driving interest. You have to refresh the park, you have to regenerate the park, you have to do new things to make people want to come. Quite frankly, I've done the slide 3 times. If I never do it again, that will be enough for me. But there are some people that love it and they come every week. It's absolutely fantastic. And it's part of that ongoing approach to keep making yourself relevant, keep making yourself cutting edge, and keep doing the things that bring people in. Our community sporting legacy is important. Those venues are about elite athletes. It's also about bringing the community from East London. And we talked at the beginning about how that community often had to suffer from serious social and economic deprivation. We have made the costs of using these venues very low. It's the same amount of money to swim in the Aquatic Centre as it is to swim in any other public pool in London. School children get free swimming lessons there, and in one pool you will find kids from East London schools who are learning to swim next to Tom Daly, our Olympic diver, who does his elite training in the diving pool next door. That's absolutely critical to the way that we operate and the way that we want the park to be and the way that we want it to be perceived. We also have delivered absolutely critical on that housing promise. The village is there. We have in total 5 neighbourhoods that we're going to build. Many of them won't be built because we're building them sequentially. Many of them won't be built for many years to come. But as we build those homes, we make sure that at least 35% of them are affordable. The current Mayor of London has set us an even more stretching target to make 50% of those houses affordable, so that what we do is we build communities. And the reason why we're not just rushing out and building them straight away, and the London property market could definitely support that, we could go out and we could do it very quickly, is that A, it's much harder to achieve the affordable housing targets if we do that, and also what we're trying to do is to build communities, and if you rush that, it doesn't work. We invest a huge amount of time and effort, not just dumping people in the houses, giving them the keys, but working with them so that you have these mixed communities and that they work. And if you go to what was the former Athletes' Village in the summer, they have enormous big screens in the open spaces between the housing blocks, and everybody comes out and watches the movie on Saturday night, or comes to the big party every other weekend, or comes to the farmers market on a Sunday morning. And that's because of the work that we do to build those communities. It's costly, it's expensive, but it pays an enormous dividend. Sustainability is also very important. We are one of the first 2 European smart sustainable districts, and part of that legacy planning that I talked about is very evident in this case. We have 2